Sergeant Tom Myers, 26, a recently assigned member of the 5th Armored Division, was upstairs changing out of his dirty uniform for a new one in a house in a small, anonymous Belgian village. Karl Nimnicht, one of the other GIs, was in the house's kitchen making lunch for the group. Tom dropped what he was doing and went downstairs when Nimnicht called him down for supper. About halfway down the steps, the home rocked violently as German gunners bombarded the village with multiple rounds of artillery. Myers found his 4 friends on the floor, frightened but generally unharmed, after he made his way down to the kitchen. In front of the house, a shell had fallen into the roadway. Myers went back upstairs and discovered a bed he had been sitting on moments before, along with a heap of rags and wood scraps, and a big hole in one wall. The field kitchen for the unit had been set up on a small pasture under the home that evening. After passing through the chow line, Myers and the other GIs were eating on the grass when they heard a swishing noise and then an explosion in a ravine not far below. Many of the guys rose and fled to the safety of neighboring homes. Myers remained where he was, now embracing the earth. Due to the shape of the hill on which they were sitting, the blast wave had passed over them. The explosion was identified as a V1 buzz bomb. The Germans had resorted to using the V1 rockets, which are also used to bombard England, in an attempt to hit targets directly behind the front. They all pondered if the next rocket would strike directly. The Germans launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, or the Battle of the Bulge, as it is now more often known, on December 16, 1944. On November 10, 1917, Tom Myers was born on a wheat farm approximately 40 miles southeast of Sacramento and 10 miles east of Lodi, California. A horse and buggy doctor delivered him, the youngest of 7 children. In those days when many people were still transitioning from teams of horses to cars and tractors, his father moved the family north to the state of Washington when he was only a few months old. There, he established a blacksmith shop and an auto repair shop, covering both forms of transportation. They relocated once more in October 1926, this time to the Willamette Valley, a rural area in Oregon. The family was heavily indebted when Tom's father purchased a sizable dairy and fruit farm in the winter of 1928-29. The Great Depression loomed in the fall of 1929 when the economy and stock market fell, leaving Tom's family, like many others, in danger of financial ruin. In order to finally graduate from high school and enroll at Oregon Agricultural College, now Oregon State University, Tom was only finishing the 8th grade. However, Tom's older brother departed the farm in the middle of his freshman year of high school. His father was too exhausted to handle the arduous tasks of farm management and lacked the funds to employ aid. At the age of 14, Tom was forced to drop out of school. Only Tom and his father remained on the property when his mother passed away in 1937, and the other children had grown up and departed. They reduced farm activities in the spring of 1940, and Tom went to work at a nearby cannery, where he quickly rose to the position of supervisor. His wedding took place on July 12, 1940. Tom thought about enlisting in the Army right away after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. But he was working as a foreman at the cannery that processed fruits and vegetables for the Army and Navy at the time. He was persuaded by the manager of the cannery that his contributions to the war effort at home were more important than his military service. His manager secured a draft deferral for him because his wife shared this sentiment. Tom's deferral ended when he moved workplaces in January 1944, making him a draft candidate. He experienced a certain sense of relief from guilt when he got his call-up. As Tom said, "I had been feeling for a while that I should be in there, doing my part, so I wasn't unhappy about being drafted." On March 4, 1944, he was inducted into the Army, making him an old man by Army standards at the age of 26. He received a 10-day furlough home in August 1944 following 17 weeks of basic and infantry training, during which he earned his designation as an expert with the M1 Garand rifle and a sharpshooter with the Browning automatic rifle, BAR. He left his wife and infant daughter behind and took a train to Fort Meade, Maryland, following the furlough. He boarded the SS Ile-de-France, a passenger liner that had been transformed into a troop transport, on September 1st, with other replacement soldiers. They were bound for Scotland, Southampton, and Omaha Beach on the opposite side of the English Channel. He was then transported by truck to a replacement depot in Belgium, along with other replacements. Myers was assigned to the 5th Armored Division, which was stationed at a small Belgian village 2 or 3 miles behind the front lines, along with roughly 50 replacements. Myers and 4 other people settled into an empty house while they awaited being sent on. While at Fort Meade, Tom met Karl Nimnicht, one of the other GIs. His baptism of fire occurred on that day when German artillery shells shook the house. Myers made friends with a number of the people in the 5th Armored Division unit during his first few days there, and he would have preferred to have remained with them. However, orders came in telling him to report to the replacement depot, or Reppel-Deppel, for reassignment. The following morning, Myers was transferred to a headquarters unit and given the task of repairing field phone lines rather than being deployed as a rifleman. He was tasked with protecting the company's CP, command post, close to the village's north end at night. As the deserters approached the CP to surrender, Myers had his first direct brush with 2 German soldiers while he was on duty at the CP. Myers was then directed to report to Madge, General Norman Coda's 28th Infantry Division. When he and his replacements arrived at a division assembly location, they were instructed to file past a stack of supplies and take as much ammo and K rations as they could carry, which was a sign of things to come. They gathered along a rutted, muddy road before beginning their journey into the woods, which was a portion of the infamous Hurtgen Forest, where operations had ground to a halt and numerous American First Army troops had sustained significant casualties. Myers was assigned to the 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Smedrick Company. After being led to the company food tents, the replacements were fed. The KPs, soldiers designated as kitchen police to support the cooks, and the cooks themselves briefed them on the events of the previous several days, including the fact that the company had been pinned down a short distance distant, and that guides were to bring the replacements up to the line. As they waited to go, Tom observed, a number of troops appeared out of the woods, lumbering forward with their heads down and no packs or firearms. They were unshaven, filthy, and appeared to be struggling to keep up with each other, Myers recalled. They didn't appear to notice us. I approached one of them with another guy and asked him where he had been and where he was headed. He simply continued westward on the trail without looking up or acknowledging that he had heard us. I suppose he had witnessed too many battles. A number of artillery rounds smashed into the area where Myers and others were waiting for their guides to arrive near the food tents. Some of the cooks and KPs were hurt when one of the cook tents was struck. As they dove into neighboring foxholes with log overheads, the replacements were spared damage. The column moved out as soon as the guides arrived. Since the Germans were only a short distance away, Myers and the other GIs were cautioned by their guides to always stay under cover as they advanced to the line. However, not everyone appeared to listen. One of the replacements was dropped by a well-placed sniper's bullet as he stood up to take off his pack before entering his fox. Myers and Wayne Newman, Tom's foxhole buddy, discovered abandoned blankets and clothes as they crept into an empty hole with overhead cover, logs that would shield them from shells that would burst in the trees above them. Tom was clearing out some stuff when he picked up a strangely hefty footwear. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a dismembered foot within. He instantly threw it into the woods in horror. The American forces repeatedly attempted to advance over the course of the following 8 or 9 days, but they were unable to overcome the Germans' fierce resistance. When not pinned down by machine gun and small arms fire, they were subjected to artillery and mortar barrages, and the regiment was ravaged by tree bursts. Due to the inability of units to gather enough physically fit soldiers, some planned attacks were canceled. Bits of logs and tree limbs, saved from the tree bursts that cut through the forest like a giant scythe, covered the cold, wet holes where the GIs huddled. They listened for the enemy's arrival for hours in the dark, in the fog, in the snow, and in the rain. Myers stated, "When the artillery stops, the silence there in the forest is eerie," attempting to be genuine about the circumstances he and his fellow soldiers were facing. The ground is now a tangled collection of plants and broken treetops, and beautiful conifers have been torn and broken. However, as the shells begin to reappear, you begin to wonder if your name may be on one of them today. But at this point, I was certain that I was living a charmed, or more accurately guided existence, so I didn't waste much time worrying about it. I didn't want to imply that I wasn't terrified. I simply tried not to think about it too much. With its massive wood ceiling, Tom and Wayne were comparatively safe in their foxhole, shielded from everything save a direct blow. When the Germans dropped around close to the top of the hill, they were dug in on, followed immediately by another. That was their biggest worry. They would walk the rounds closer and closer, modifying a few yards each time. They anticipated the next round to land squarely on them after hearing one burst on the hill above them. They were shaken in their burrow by a dull thud, a dud burying itself beside their foxhole. Myers remembered how Wayne and I quickly created a new hole in the mountainside and covered it with logs and limbs in reaction to the threats they appeared to face every day. We knew where the German soldiers were, and they knew where we were, but I only saw a few of them, and then only briefly. At night, we switched patrols, but neither side appeared very interested in attacking at that point in the conflict. On November 7, 1944, the 28th Division was scheduled to begin offensive operations. The 109th Infantry Regiment of the division was tasked with capturing the forested area north of Gurmeter. However, after only 300 yards of advance, they encountered an undiscovered minefield, were pinned down by mortar and artillery fire, and were subjected to harassment from local counterattacks. After 2 days of warfare, hardly a mile was achieved, and then the 109th pressed in. During the conflict, the 109th would cover almost all of this ground. Due to weather, well-prepared defenses, resolute defenders, and terrain, the division was unable to secure the objectives it was given, and its other two regiments did not fare much better during their operations. On November 17th, early in the morning, the 8th Infantry Division relieved the 28th Division. It was also Myers' daughter's second birthday. Additionally, the previous week was Tom's 27th birthday. The enemy was not the only danger facing the GIs. After leaving the Hurtgen forest, Wayne and I were so tired that we unrolled our water-soaked blankets on the ground, crawled between them, and immediately fell asleep. I didn't realize how cold it was until I started to throw back the blankets, Myers said of his experience leaving the front lines. They were immobile. I got to my feet and they felt like clubs. However, I realized that my feet had also frozen when they thawed and the discomfort began. But despite that, it was nice to be alive and away from the gloomy, dark hell of the Hurtgen. Numerous people perished or suffered permanent disabilities. Some have emotional or psychological wounds that would last a lifetime. While some were cowards, others were heroes. I was fortunate to leave there in quite decent shape, because I was one of those people who did what had to be done. In the Schmidt-Wassenack region of the Hurtgen Forest, the 28th Infantry Division had lost more than 6,000 men, about 2,000 replacements, many of whom, having just completed basic training, had to be absorbed by the 110th Regiment after the combat. Myers believed that both his faith and his strong farm family background had helped him. Despite the most difficult situations, he also managed to maintain his sense of humor. Tom was one of just 75 combat effectives in the 3rd Battalion as of November 16th. The 28th Division was moved to the Ardennes, a peaceful section of the front, to recuperate and take in replacements. Tom's company reached the town of Weiler, Luxembourg on November 17th. With its 112th Infantry Regiment on the north or left flank, the 110th Infantry in the center, and the 109th Infantry on the right, the 28th Infantry Division, originally a part of the Pennsylvania National Guard and dubbed the Bucket of Blood Division due to the shape of its red sleeve insignia, was dispersed throughout the front. The division had to cover a large frontage, therefore it set up a number of strong points at the company level, connected by contact patrols and observation posts. Weiler was located east of the St. Vith-Diekirch roadway, also known as Skyline Drive, which housed the majority of the 28th Division's strong points. About 2 miles from Weiler, the trucks dropped off the 28th Division's GIs, who assumed they were heading to a rest spot. Even though it was only a dirt trail that crossed the hard surface road to the settlement, it was a challenging trip for those men, who were exhausted and had freezing feet. It was after dark when they arrived in the town. Tom stole some of his comrades' equipment to lighten his load, since one of Myers' friends was struggling. More than the other GIs, his feet were hurting and freezing. Despite this, the man and 3 others who were also having difficulty keeping up fell farther and farther behind the main body. Myers remembered the challenging hike. I got frustrated and did something that I later regretted, in part because my feet were hurting too. Myers was informed that a German patrol had likely ambushed the lone American after arriving in the town with the main group. I dropped his equipment that I was carrying down in the road and rushed to catch up with the others, leaving him and the other 3 guys to fend for themselves. Myers had a hard time falling asleep that night. I didn't get much sleep that night since my conscience was aching. Why had I acted so self-centeredly? Why had I grown impatient and abandoned him? Myers was relieved when the 4 men who had been abandoned showed up the following morning. They had taken refuge along the road the night before. The headquarters personnel of Companies Y and M, 2 mortar sections of M Company, an anti-tank platoon of the 110th Regiment, and the 3rd Platoon, I Company, garrisoned Weiler. There would be roughly 132 officers and troops in the town's garrison, including 40 officers and men in a rifle platoon, 33 in the company headquarters, 16 in 2 81mm mortar sections, and 10 in an anti-tank battalion. Myers' team was assigned to man outposts on high ground east of the hamlet, between Weiler and the Our River, the morning after they arrived in town. Contact patrols to the units on the left and right flanks were the responsibility of a 2nd squad. Every day, the 2 squads would alternate off duty. We rarely saw the enemy on the days that we were on outpost, but one time, during a snowstorm, just before darkness, we saw a German patrol, dressed in white snowsuits, moving toward Weiler. When they squatted down in the snow, it was impossible to see them, Myers recalled, of those early days in the village. During patrols, the majority of the confrontations with the Germans took place during the day. At one case, the Germans had taken up their position on the American side of the river at the village of Luxembourg, close to the Luxembourg castle, which was situated on a hill in the middle of the village, east of Weiler, close to the Our River. 8 to 10 men from Myers' squad were dispatched to conduct the investigation. They were fired upon as they passed down a ravine and approached the castle. The team hid and started shooting back at windows in the castle's tower. Myers seized the chance to utilize his rifle's grenade launcher. His initial shot landed 2 feet above the window from whence the gunfire was emanating. After adjusting, he fired once more, and this time the bullet went through the window and exploded. They later withdrew, unharmed, when they came under additional fire. Weiler was a community with no more than 30 major buildings that lined 2 parallel streets running north to south. 2 more streets joined them to form a single block, with the southernmost leaving the settlement to the east and the other end to the southwest. The majority of the buildings were concentrated on a single block, with the village church at its southern end. Myers' team was based at Rue Principale 6, Café Peffer, on the north side of the street, a few doors from the town church during their first week at Weiler. Anti-tank weapons were placed a few yards away, one across the street in a backyard where it could fire to the south, and another behind the next building to the east. The squad was later relocated to Kiesenxanter-Jose's home at Rue Principale 5, the next building to the west. Myers' team was permitted to sleep in late on the days when they weren't manning outposts. In order to give the men a day off the line, on some days they were driven to the adjacent town of Clairvaux, which was only 11 miles northwest of Weiler and home to the regimental headquarters. They were able to shave, take a shower, and change into fresh clothes there. The town church in Weiler was one of the forbidden buildings. The GIs didn't want to tamper with its sacredness. However, Myers' squad had just returned from a patrol and gone to their barracks one evening, just before dark, when the church bell rang, breaking the silence. The peculiar hour and the peculiar ringing pattern only served to heighten their suspicions. After returning from Company CP, Myers' sergeant instructed Tom to gather several guys and look into the church. Myers: We walked to the church and carefully opened the front entrance while glancing around with our torches. The bell rope on the back wall was the only thing moving. It was slowly going up and down. We summoned the individual, whoever he was, to descend from the bell tower. No response was found. The bell kept ringing uncannily, like a code, while the rope kept going up and down. Myers located a bell tower ladder and ascended to a trap door. He shone his flashlight around and pushed the door open. A man wearing an American uniform with staff sergeant stripes and a shoulder patch from the 8th Infantry Division was lying on the ground, gently dragging the bell rope. He looked as like he had been there for days, and he was unkempt and unshaven. Additionally, a number of empty wine bottles were scattered. He questioned where Myers was, but it appeared that he was unaware of his presence. He looked to have been enjoying his promotion to second lieutenant, despite his slurred speech. He said he had no idea how he got to the chapel. He was brought to the division headquarters after being questioned at the company's CP. The company was not informed of the truth behind his story. Just before December 16th, there was another noteworthy occurrence at a crossroads close to the town. To their right or south side, the company had been in regular communication with a unit of the U.S. 109th Infantry Regiment. Contact was occasionally established at the 109th's nearby CP, and other times at the crossroads. Myers and his squad reached the intersection to establish contact on this particular day. They waited for more than an hour until 4 or 5 unfamiliar males came up. They wore brand new, immaculate uniforms devoid of insignias. This little group came to a stop about 50 meters from the junction. One of them then stepped forward. When asked where they typically met the patrol, the person said that they were a new unit that had replaced the old one. The soldier then started inquiring about the defenses and the amount of men in Weiler, stating that he had been instructed to do so by his company commander. However, this seemed dubious. The stranger interrupted the conversation when Myers's patrol members went down the road to speak with the other guys in this new group, stating that they were running late and needed to return to their CP. He then vanished with his companions in the direction they had come from. When Myers's patrol returned to their CP, they informed their company commander of their concerns. They were unsure but thought the patrol they had come across was likely made up of Germans wearing American uniforms. Myers was on night watch at the rear of the house his squad was staying at a few days later. The moon shone brightly as the clouds passed overhead. The region was almost completely dark at one point when a cloud obscured the moonlight. Suddenly, Myers heard a faint rustling sound and saw something out of the corner of his eye in the dark light. In an attempt to identify the cause of the movement, Myers grabbed a hand grenade from his harness and, braced for the worst, pulled the pin while holding the handle down. When the clouds cleared from the moon after a minute or two, a big house cat sitting on a fence was visible in the light. Myers worked to replace the grenade's pin for the next hour. There was always a chance of accidents, particularly in a fighting zone. One night, a machine gun squad that lived in a house across the street from Myers's squad was approaching the house with some of its members arguing loudly when all of a sudden there was firing. The burst of a machine gun fired at close range nearly sliced one of the men in the street in two. His crewman had unintentionally set off the weapon while lowering it from his shoulder. Rumors circulated in early December that the 28th Division would shortly be relieved and return to France for reconstruction and reorganization. I Company stayed at Weiler in spite of these allegations, receiving a few hospital returns and replacements. On or around December 14th, Myers's squad had just completed reporting back to the company commander on the findings of their most recent patrol when he informed them that trucks were waiting to pick up their additional ammo and that they would be relieved on Sunday, December 17th. All ammunition over their basic load, the amount needed for a day of fighting, was to be turned in. Myers only maintained a belt of clips and 2 bandoliers of ammunition for his M1. For his grenade launcher, he also stored 3 or 4 anti-tank and anti-personnel grenades. Another unit was returning from a patrol along the Our River at around midnight, just as Myers was reporting for guard duty. Across the river, they said, the Germans seemed to be having a celebration. Artillery shells landed in and around the town at 5:35 a.m., waking Myers, who had finished his shift on watch duty and gone back to the structure housing his squad. He leaped from his bed, pulled on his overcoat, climbed into the ammo harness, fastened his belt with the bayonet, canteen, and first aid box, picked up his weapon, and went down the stairs to join the rest of his team. Earlier, men who had left for the river poured back into the settlement. Numerous German forces were said to be crossing the river. Myers was instructed to accept Private Thorne, a 39-year-old former bookkeeper from Chicago Heights, Illinois, who was one of the unit's recent replacements. The two were to guard a position overlooking a deep valley at the village's southern edge. Thorne and Myers waited in a tiny foxhole. They could see little as they tried to look into the early fog that shrouded the village. On the other side of the ravine, however, they could see into the woods where shapes were moving as the fog cleared. Thorne felt compelled to share his life story with Myers while they waited. Only a few days prior, Thorne had come at I Company as a raw replacement, straight from the United States. He claimed that neither he nor the Army were intended to be there. His back was really weak from a back operation a few years prior. Additionally, his draft board had summoned him up for a physical and categorized him as 4F, unfit for service, despite the fact that he was almost 39. Later on, however, he was called up once again and initiated. He was sent to the hospital once during basic training because he was unable to complete several duties. He was informed that he would be issued a medical discharge while he was there, but orders arrived and he was sent out in the interim. He anticipated being released at any moment. Small arms fire burst from the opposite side of the gully as they waited in their foxhole. In order to reach their position, one German soldier crawled up the near side of the gulf. Myers and Thorne looked up over the side of the hole to see where the bullet had come from when it blasted into the soil behind them. Another shot was fired while they were doing so, revealing the German's position. Myers fired again. However, the 39-year-old Illinois 4F accountant had died when the prior bullet had impacted him in the skull, right behind his helmet. It seemed that the German who had fired the fatal shot was already dead, but Myers stayed in the hole for another half hour, inspecting Thorne's lifeless body. Tom was told to return to the home by a sergeant from a house right behind Myers's foxhole, which was also being fired upon. Holding his gun in his arms, Myers scampered to the window on the side of the house. He got up, rolled out the window, and landed on the ground. Myers soon discovered that the danger in the house was equal to that which he had encountered in the foxhole. When I looked up, I saw a young, white-faced private with his finger on the trigger of his weapon, pointing it at my head. I called out his name and inquired about his whereabouts. "Oh God, I almost pulled the trigger because I thought you were German," he added. I then went on to scold him, explaining that my outfit and helmet should have made it clear to him that I wasn't German. However, he ought to have shot me before I grabbed him if he believed I was. He sat in a corner for a while, trembling, because I was so mad at him, and he was so uneasy and weak in the knees. The battle for Weiler continued all day and into the night, despite the Germans' intention to seize the village early on the morning of the 16th, in order to establish a path into the back of the American defenses. With the help of an anti-tank platoon and a section of 81mm mortars, the defenders of Weiler I Company, with the exception of the 1st Platoon, which had been sent to a battalion observation post, OP, along the Walhausen Road to the north, repulsed wave after wave of attacking soldiers. They joined the army and battled as riflemen after the anti-tank platoon and mortar teams ran out of ammunition. The Germans had been forced to withdraw soldiers from their planned attack on Weiler due to fighting along the route north of the town. The soldiers assaulting the town were permitted to send out relief workers and evacuate their wounded twice in the morning. They could not hold the village, according to one of Myers's fellow soldiers, who advised him to hide in a cellar or closet until the Germans discovered them and then surrender. Myers, however, would not have it. When I told him, "You may do what you want, but I will not surrender," I found it difficult to keep my disdain for him from coming through. I intend to battle here for as long as I can. The Germans stopped firing around 1:30 in the afternoon and dispatched a white flag commander to the village to demand that the Americans surrender or face annihilation. Their plea was denied by the commander of I Company. Myers ran upon another GI named Tennessee, as the most of the men in his home switched to other defensive positions. Tom and Tennessee proceeded to another residence to get ammunition, while Tennessee carried a bar. They discovered a number of other GIs there. Then another guy rushed in and shouted, "We had best leave. There are a lot of Jerrys coming up the street firing." Tennessee seized a .30 caliber machine gun that had been left in the corner as everyone made their way to the back door. He requested that someone pick up a can of ammunition and accompany him to the street. Myers grabbed a .30 caliber ammunition container and went after it. Along the side of one of the main north-south streets, they ran to a modest stone wall. Myers fed a belt of ammunition while Tennessee fired. Tom witnessed a number of Germans fall to the ground and others seek refuge. For the time being, this halted the German march up the street. The Germans captured the lower portion of the village, while Myers and the other GIs had solidified their positions in the higher part by nightfall. However, the Americans quickly ran out of ammunition. The commander of I Company reported shortly after dark that the settlement was surrounded, but they were to remain in their positions until 6 p.m. After that, they were to meet at the CP, divide into two groups, and try to return to battalion headquarters at the town of Constum, which is a few kilometers to the northwest. They were to sneak out of the village to the west or over the hill to the north. When the I Company platoon requested ammunition along the Walhausen road, they were informed that tanks with resupply were on their way. With their ammo supply running low, the anti-tank platoon and the remainder of the company likewise waited for the tanks to arrive at Weiler. As darkness fell, however, the 707th Tank Battalion's tank platoon had not arrived at the I Company. The Walhausen Road OP requested American artillery fire on their own positions at 6:30 p.m. after reporting that enemy vehicles, some of which were armed with multiple-barrel 20mm guns, were attacking them. One man managed to get away. According to Myers, the night of December 16th to 17 was a time of great frustration as they tried in vain to break through the German fortifications. The Germans were closing in on the Americans as another chilly and misty day broke. There was a shallow valley behind Myers and the other GIs since they were in a wooded area. There was a steep open hill front of them. They knew they would have to abandon their position as the German mortar fire grew more intense. Myers heard the order to charge up and over the hill from his company commander. Myers explained what transpired next. After running a certain distance straight up the hill, I found myself gasping for air because the hill was so steep. I saw a hole in the ground at this moment. While I recovered enough breath to go up over the hill, I considered jumping in the hole for 2 or 3 minutes to get away from the blazing fire. But when I dove into the hole, a few other men thought the same thing, and before long, I was covered in numerous men's bodies. I fought my way out from behind the other men, barely able to breathe. I turned over and glanced up as the men finally started to leave me. German soldiers with fixed bayonets on their weapons surrounded the hole. I had no idea they were so closely pursuing us. "The war is over for you," declared one of the Germans. Myers was marched off the field into captivity together with 14 other GIs, some of whom were injured. After a protracted and dangerous march, several narrow escapes and dodging ambushes, about 25 American soldiers under the command of a captain were able to flee Weiler and arrive at friendly lines. Hundreds of GIs, including Tom Myers, were interned in a German prisoner of war camp in Czechoslovakia. Tom would be freed and returned to the United States months later. The Army released him on November 30th, 1945. After returning to Oregon, Tom started a family with 3 kids and worked in both agriculture and lumber. In March 2011, he passed away. The town's residents recalled the American defenders' valor enough to erect a memorial to their actions, despite the fact that prominent chronicles of the Ardennes activities, such as Hugh Cole's Battle of the Bulge or Trevor Dupuy's Hitler's Last Gamble, say little about the battle at Weiler. On September 12, 1983, a monument honoring American servicemen was dedicated. In Weiler, Luxembourg, the 28th Infantry Division of the Army was dedicated. At the same time, the memorial was built in a square known as Plaza Tom Myers Square. The memorial was built by the people of Weiler as a way to honor the numerous American soldiers who died in and around Weiler on December 16th and 17th, 1944, while defending the town during the Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive into the Ardennes. For the residents of Weiler, Tom Myers represented American GIs, the troops who had defended the town against a stronger German army.